Well, as Donald Trump attends that NATO meeting in London, back across the Atlantic, his political rivals have laid out what they say is, quote, overwhelming evidence of the US president's misconduct in office. The 300-page impeachment report says Mr. Trump used his power to seek help from Ukraine's president to benefit his re-election bid. Heidi Jo Castro starts our coverage from Washington.
House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff's presentation of his committee's report on Donald Trump offered little more than was already known, but it's a key moment in what could be the impeachment of a president.
This is not about Ukraine. This is about our democracy. This is about our national security. This is about whether the American people have a right to expect that the President of the United States is going to act in their interests, with their security in mind, and not for some illicit personal or political reason. So Americans should care deeply about whether the President of the United States is betraying their trust in him, betraying that oath that he took to the Constitution to protect our country and defend its institutions.
According to the report, President Trump solicited interference from Ukraine to benefit his re-election, conditioning a White House visit for the Ukrainian president and $400 million in U.S. military aid on a public statement that Ukraine would investigate Joe Biden's family for alleged corruption. Trump denies he did anything wrong. A White House spokeswoman released a statement saying, at the end of a one-sided sham process, Chairman Schiff and the Democrats utterly failed to produce any evidence of wrongdoing by President Trump. This report reflects nothing more than their frustrations. Chairman Schiff's report reads like the ramblings of a basement blogger straining to prove something when there is evidence of nothing. The evidence came from 17 witnesses, including State Department and White House insiders, who testified Trump ran a shadow campaign that undermined official U.S. foreign policy toward Ukraine. There was also the partial transcript of a phone call in which Trump asked Ukraine's president for a favor, the Biden investigation. Republicans rebutted with their own report offering a very different reading of the facts. They say the testimonies are hearsay, that the phone call was perfect, and that the Democrats' efforts to impeach the president are an attack on a duly elected leader.
Tomorrow provides nothing except a dreary-eyed, drowsy appraisal for this country to watch as the impeachment process slowly drags on with no direction, no focus, because they're having one big problem. And the big problem is the president did nothing wrong, and they can't prove it.
The process will now shift to the House Judiciary Committee, which will draft articles of impeachment likely to focus on abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Americans have been evenly divided on whether to impeach and remove Trump from office. Both political parties are claiming to be protecting American democracy. Heidi Jo Castro, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Okay, let's bring in Tom Ginsberg. He's a Leo Spitz professor at the University of Chicago Law School and co-author of How to Save a Constitutional Democracy. He joins us live from Chicago. Tom Ginsberg, have they so far, in your mind, managed to capture the arc of Donald Trump's alleged wrongdoings?
Yes, I think the Democrats have done what they've set out to do, which is to try to lay out a very clear, simple message for what they think he's done wrong, which, of course, is to misuse foreign policy powers for his own personal partisan gain. It doesn't seem to be changing the needle in terms of Donald Trump's core supporters. The polls seem to be just about where they've always been. And so we continue to go forward in this very intense, what it looks like to be quite a partisan brawl in the Judiciary Committee and going forward from there.
Okay, going forward, how does this translate, if indeed it does translate, into being an atlas towards somebody or a group of people saying, yes, we are going for a full, formal impeachment, 11 or 12 months towards the end of this presidency when he's standing for re-election?
Right. So the process is that the Judiciary Committee now will have hearings and will draft, if they find wrongdoing, articles of impeachment. I think everyone expects that to happen on a party line vote. I also expect it to be quite a partisan brawl. The procedures in the Judiciary Committee are different than those in the Intelligence Committee. It's going to be much more open. The minority party can call witnesses. So we're going to see both sides sort of appealing to the crowd, if you will. Then the process is that it moves to the whole House floor. And each article of impeachment, if there are multiple articles, will be debated there. And again, I think this is a bit like a television show where you kind of know what the next few episodes are going to look like, that there's going to be probably a highly partisan vote to impeach the president. But then, of course, it would move to the Senate. And the Senate, there's virtually very little indication that any of the Republican senators would cross over at this point because the president's base is so strong.
Is there something of a disconnect here between
now,
the
if
central...
that happens, of course,
Pardon me for interrupting you, but is there a disconnect here between what the central allegation is and how people like you and I and people around the world understand it, which is basically the allegation that Donald Trump lent on the president of Ukraine to get some dirt on Joe Biden and Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, on the one hand, and yet when that comes down to the question, one of the key questions that people will have to vote on is Donald Trump an imminent, clear and present threat to American security? And that's a difficult one to tick the box on when you kind of offset that against what we've been hearing about over the past couple of months now.
Right. Of course, the standard in the Constitution is pretty vague. It's treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. And as it's come down over the many impeachments we've had over 200-something years, it's really very much a political standard, as you suggest, so that, while we use legal language and there may be evidence of actual violation of a criminal statute here, is that enough to warrant removal? That's a separate and very political question. What's novel in this particular instance is that, as you say, it is coming up right against a presidential election cycle, which is very much already begun. And so we have the real possibility that the final episode of the show, as I put it, is going to be in November of 2020. The voters are ultimately going to have the choice on whether to keep Donald Trump in or not. If they decide that they want to keep him in, notwithstanding a vote of impeachment and a failure to remove by the Senate, if Donald Trump wins re-election, my research suggests that that's never happened in a presidential democracy. We've had many impeachments around the world, many removals, even some cases where you have impeachment without removal. But to have a president then win re-election, that's really uncharted territory. And so the United States may be entering a very new and unusual phase of our constitutional democracy, perhaps a dangerous one.
Okay, Mr. Ginsburg there in Chicago for us. Thank you so much. Well, staying with American politics, a prominent American lobbyist has been accused of conspiring to conceal the source of millions of dollars in donations to Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. George Nader, who worked as a go-between for Donald Trump's top advisors and various Middle Eastern interests, is one of 8 people facing campaign finance charges. The US-Lebanese businessman was allegedly involved in a scheme to gain influence in Clinton's circle. Al Jazeera's White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett joins us live from Washington. So the other side of the political divide, Kimberly, but significant accusations and claims here.
Yeah, uncovered, unsealed on Tuesday, the Department of Justice filing this case. We know that George Nader is now awaiting trial in federal court in Alexandria, Virginia, I believe is where it typically is. We know that it's Virginia, and that's usually where it's held. This is really significant for a number of reasons. Let's start with reason number one. This was a gentleman who had ties to Trump's presidential campaign, but also continued to have ties as Trump became President Trump, even visiting the White House, we're told, several times in 2017. But even more interesting are his ties and who he actively lobbied for, and that is the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, as well as the Crown Prince of UAE, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed. So this is significant on that level. But then also the charges against this individual are certainly noteworthy in and of themselves. The fact that he was raising money, making these donations, we're told up to $3.5 million, that this was something that was then sort of known as a straw donor, making these contributions in concert with 7 other individuals. So this is something that is is illegal under U.S. law. You cannot sort of make these kind of anonymous donations or take other people's money to make these donations, which is what the Department of Justice is alleging this scheme was all about, along with a man by the name of Ahmed Khawaja. And we're told that even sort of high-profile celebrities were involved in this and participating in some of these fundraisers, Hollywood celebrities, sports figures, even from the basketball world. And this is not the first time that George Nader has had brushes with the law, we're told. He also has been charged back in July with child pornography charges, and he has pled not guilty to those. He was charged again with similar charges back in 1991. So when you look at the totality of this, not only is this sort of an alleged illegal scheme, but he's been charged as well with falsifying records. The enormity of it certainly registering on the radar here in Washington, and also noteworthy the fact that not only was he trying to curry favor with the Clinton campaign, but he was seen as a star witness in that case against Donald Trump, put under the microscope whether or not there was, in fact, a collusion between Donald Trump's presidential campaign and Russia with that probe under Robert Mueller, the special counsel.
Such a complex story. Kimberly, thank you so much for breaking it down for us. Do appreciate it. Talk to you soon.